Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Real History. I'm your host, Jared Frederick, and I'm joined this evening by my good friend, Harriet Gaston. And Harriet and I have worked on a lot of projects together. We've been involved in a lot of historical organizations together, and I've wanted to have her on the show for a long time to share some of her own expertise and research interest. So, Harriet, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight.
I'm glad I could join you tonight.
All right.
I really do appreciate that.
What movie did you pick for us today, and why did you pick it?
Okay. I selected Hidden Figures. As the title says, this is information about people who weren't recognized until recently. And the idea of women being in STEM appeals to me very much. And the actresses who play these three wonderful historical figures do a wonderful job, and I'm hoping, I hope that movies like this will inspire others to do that research on what we don't know yet.
Absolutely. And in speaking to the hidden figures aspect of this movie, not only were they hidden figures in the realm of the history books, but also in cinematic representations of the space program and the Apollo missions, because many of these women were involved in the Apollo program. And you don't see them in Apollo 13. You don't see them in a lot of these other movies. And so this is a fine cinematic representation of people finally getting their due who have long deserved it.
I agree. Yes.
All right. Wonderful. All right, so let's go ahead and check out 2016's Hidden Figures.
Catherine's in the 6th grade.
They want to take her early.
Tetrahedron, dodecahedron.
There's a really incredible backstory behind Catherine Goebel's education, because her family lived in White Sulphur Springs. She had the opportunity to go to high school and then to college, but it meant that she had to move over 2 hours away.
Correct. Yes, from what I've read is that the typical education for Black people in the South, you could go to 8th grade. But after that, if you wanted to go further, you would either have to pay. It was not free. And so in this case, for Catherine to be able to go further than that, meant that, she had to leave the community. There was no support of that. It does remind me of my family. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've heard the stories of my grandmother and her sisters actually repeating the same grade over and over because of their wanting to learn.
Wow.
So there's indeed that personal side to it as well for me.
So from what I understand is that Catherine Goebel's dad rented them a house, for like 8 months or so out of the year. And then he'd come and get them. And then they would go back year after year in that same sort of... So it's an incredibly high price to pay for an education, being separated from your dad for a good 2/3 of the year.
And his working, he would be what we consider to be low middle class. So that would be some money to be able to have two places.
Damn Russians are watching us right now. Sputniks.
And indeed, that was the paranoia of the time. With the launching of Sputnik, this volleyball-sized satellite truly put the fear of God into people. Like, oh, the Russians, they're watching us. Not an over-exaggeration here, emotionally speaking, on the part of some people.
Yes.
She's good at this stuff.
Woo! Atta girl. We're all set.
By the way, producer Andy, who is a certified mechanic, said that what Dorothy just did actually wouldn't do anything. So perhaps the first of a number of theatrical absurdities in the film, mechanically speaking.
3 Negro women are chasing a white police officer down the highway in Hampton, Virginia, 1961. Ladies, that there is a God-ordained miracle.
These women had been, by and large, working for NASA and its predecessor for a number of years by this point. And really what opened the door for they and women like them was the job opportunities that came about as a result of World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt put into action an executive order saying that defense jobs could not discriminate. That's when we see African American women going into factories, the workplace, and yes, also aeronautics. So that was really the beginning of it.
It's interesting that they're called human computers. So they're doing the work of what we now call computers, mechanical, and that a cell phone has about as much memory as would have been there. Yeah.
They were sometimes doing these calculations with slide rules and things like that. I'd taken a slide rule into the classroom.
Wow.
And I passed around to students. I'm like, guess what this is? They have no idea what it is. And then hopefully they realize just a little bit how much easier they have it.
Okay, how about an abacus? The abacus. Abacus. That would be another thing. I remember that when I was younger.
That's a pretty big jump, sir.
What?
Just that.
Who the hell is he?
Paul Stafford, our lead engineer, Mr. Webb.
I learned that the 2 white gentlemen here are actually composites of the historical figures that would have been in place.
I think just about every white character, with the exception of John Glenn, is a composite character in this movie.
Yes.
And I think one reason why that is so is just because there's so many thousands of people working at NASA.
Right.
And you can't have dozens of these supplemental characters, each of whom have a different role. And so I suppose from a thematic standpoint, it makes sense to make them composite figures.
Right. It's interesting that, yes, the women are separated and the locations are definitely different.
And for a time, going by some of their accounts, the room was marked colored computers.
Correct. Yes.
And from a legal point of view, when NASA becomes fully federalized in 1958, okay, when it is created. Before that, it was the National Advisory Committee of Aeronautics. It was NACA instead of NASA before this. But when it becomes NASA, much like what happened in the military 10 years prior, is that it's technically desegregated. But there are these informal and unofficial lines of segregation that still exist in one form or another.
They're in Virginia, so that being a southern state, it probably would have been frowned upon to have a true integration of men and women and black and white.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we aren't talking legal norms, we're talking about cultural norms, long-established cultural norms. That makes sense.
Shut it down.
Do you know how many disasters like that occurred?
Oh my goodness. I think more than what NASA would care to admit. And this was true not only for the capsule, but also for the rockets that they were testing. I mean, they were having some of these rockets, explode 5 seconds after takeoff and hardly, make it off the landing ground or the takeoff area. Wow. And so, suffice it to say, there was a lot of trial and error. And for some astronauts, it seemed like a great way to have a short career. as some of these tests were ongoing.
Flathead rivets would reduce wind drag.
Mary, a person with engineer's mind should be an engineer. You can't be a computer the rest of your life.
Luckily for us, though, as historians, one of the great things, especially for filmmakers as well as historians, is that NASA filmed and photographed absolutely everything.
All right.
And so there's such a rich treasure trove of visual material, if not for the directors of motion pictures like this one, but for documentarians and stuff like that. There's just so much footage. And it seemed like every few years they find and digitize a few more things.
Okay.
I'm a Negro woman. I'm not going to entertain the impossible.
And I'm a Polish Jew whose parents died in a Nazi prison camp. Now I'm standing beneath a spaceship.
My understanding is that the person he represents is the one who encouraged her to take the engineering test. Is someone kind of interested in interior design? I'm looking at the walls and the doors like, yeah, that looks like 1960.
The movie does a really good job in that regard. Now, this room here kind of looks like a lair for a James Bond villain, I think. Maybe they got a little bit too stylistic with this one room. But it certainly captures the ambience. Like, you look at that and you immediately say, oh, yep, that's the Cold War. That's the 1960s. So it's a very cool space, though.
To be clear, in 14 days, the Mercury 7 will be here for training. And I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to be asking us questions about our work.
I was curious, the logo of NASA, has that always been that logo?
It's pretty much stayed the same, and I think the logic is why fix what ain't broken. It's a good solid logo, and classy stays classy, I suppose.
Yes.
Are not going to have a problem with having their work checked, are they, Paul?
No, sir.
Good. So let's have an amen, damn it.
Amen. Amen.
When you think about Kevin Costner's filmography, it seems like once every decade he's drawn back to the early 1960s because he's in JFK.
Yes.
And then he plays Kenneth O'Donnell, one of JFK's aides in the movie 13 Days. And here he is yet again in an early 1960s film working for the Kennedy government.
Right.
In 5 or 6 years, maybe he'll be in another 1960s movie.
Amen.
Amen.
I'm not going to be able
Work
to.
on what you can read. The rest is classified. You don't have clearance.
No, definitely a number of barriers that they all had to face.
Yes, sir. That's 960.
From a visual standpoint, not only is she surrounded by white men, but all the men are also wearing white shirts. And meanwhile, she's wearing a very colorful and vibrant dress, and she stands out in a crowd in more ways than one. So it's a very purposeful, artistic choice on the part of the filmmakers to accentuate that.
I know they say to call for you all, but in my mind I already jumped. If I stay.
This part about her running to find a restroom or a ladies' room for a black person, it actually is associated with one of the other characters. Catherine just said, I went to the restroom until they told me I couldn't, and then I ignored them.
Yeah. So she just flat out ignored the segregation standards. Yeah. So was it Mary Jackson who had to run on occasion here and there? Yeah. And this, of course, becomes one of the kind of repetitive scenes that we see in the film. It becomes one of the power struggles later on in the movie.
And it kind of highlights some of the things as the genders were moving up in, the women were wanting to go into more and more powerful, or seemed to be powerful, positions where the design was for men, white men. So the idea of having a restroom, a ladies' room, nearby, just it wouldn't have occurred to them.
That in and of itself would have been an anomaly, having a women's room, regardless of whether it was for white women or black women.
Need those done first.
He wants those done first. Okay, get going.
I'm sorry about that. Somebody's working on it right now.
Jim Parsons' character definitely evokes Sheldon off of his other TV persona, kind of the snotty scientist.
There's some aspects of that, yes.
You can't but help to think that's why he was casted, you know, in that role. You know, contrary to what we see in the film, Catherine Goebel, you know, later on admits that she never really felt out of place. And the reason why she claimed that was so, despite working in segregated Virginia, she said everybody at work was just so focused on what they were doing that people didn't really pay mind to her skin color or her gender, that everyone was just so laser focused. You know, President Kennedy had this mission for the space program, this mission for the country, and kind of personal prejudice often just kind of stripped away, is because it wasn't in people's time or calculations to keep that in mind. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for everybody, but that's what she attested to later on. I'd like an office like that.
The fact that his office is above the other workers, and there is a separation, even if it is glass, kind of shows you the power play.
It's a great point.
What I'm asking everyone in that room, all my geniuses, is to look beyond the numbers, to look around them, through them, for answers to questions we don't even know to ask.
There was so much pressure for people working at NASA by 1961, 1962, because, you know, in the late 1950s, you know, Russia sent a sphere to the moon. They beat us to the moon in that regard. They beat the United States in sending a man into space. And so, you know, the pressure was really on here. And I think some of these scenes where, you know, just a lot of these overworked employees and managers, you know, they just look so fatigued in some of these scenes. And I think that's one thing that this movie does really well, is it shows just how tiring crunching these numbers could be.
Well, as I recall correctly, JFK talks about putting a man on the moon in 10 years. So how do you start that?
Because without it, we're not going anywhere. I mean, we're staying on the ground. We're not flying into space. We're not circling the Earth, and we're certainly not touching the moon. And in my mind,
one of the real life figures for Kevin Costner's composite character was a NASA manager by the name of Robert Gilruth, who had quite an extended career in NASA. And we'll have Andy put up a photo here of him, and you're welcome to take a look at his biography. But he is one of perhaps the 3 individuals that Kevin Costner is based on.
Gets to sleep by herself because she's the oldest.
Yes, it is fair.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. Constance, Kathy, sit.
My understanding is that her first husband died from a tumor or cancer.
And one can only imagine how difficult it was to balance one's professional life with one's personal life in this sort of context.
Are the Russians fixing to attack us?
Where'd you get that from?
We had to hide under our desks today, all scrunched up.
Okay, baby, that's called a drill.
Duck and cover.
Duck and cover, that's it. Yes.
And sometimes in the classroom, I have my students do duck and cover drills when we're talking about the Cold War.
Wow.
And, you know, it kind of puts them in the moment a little bit. And of course, you know, the piece of plywood that they're hiding under will protect them from a nuclear blast.
Yes.
I give them that assurance.
I know. Come here. All right, now this time really go to bed. Okay? Love y'all.
I love the stars and the moons and the picture of a spaceship.
Kind of hinting at they're aspiring to be like their mother, no doubt.
Yes.
Praise God!
Sunday's finest. For most black folks, you dress up, and the hat, women wearing hat, is typical.
Is coming. From the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to the good Reverend Dr. King.
And you and I were talking about Dr. Henry Louis Gates before our show was getting started, and we both have an affinity for finding your roots and shows like that. But he also did another documentary called The Black Church.
Yes.
Which, you know, because these churches, they were not only houses of worship, they were also staging grounds for protest, actions in the civil rights movement, and platforms for aspiring to the next best thing.
Right.
And so I think this scene and this setting fits in very well with kind of the narrative of the film in that regard.
Yes. Because the pastor is sharing news about what's going on in the black community beyond their world, their community, so they can hear both not only the struggle but the being able to overcome the progress.
So I'm saying, don't play the fool. I don't want to see you get hurt. NASA's never ever given you guys your due. Having a couple extra degrees ain't gonna change that.
It's hard to overcome something when you don't have the support from who's closest to you, and that can be true for no matter what group of people. If nobody's done it before and you're trying, sometimes there can be issues.
I don't want any cream seeds.
No lip, little miss. Your brother gets them, and so do you.
Typical kids.
That's Alan Shepard, U.S. Navy pilot. He could be the first man in space.
And as we find out later, Alan Shepard was the man aspiring to be the first human being into space, but Yuri Gagarin beats him to the punch. What my students often enjoy hearing about is technically the first American into space is Ham the chimpanzee. And that always becomes one of the favorite stories of my 1960s class.
Ladies, didn't want to run off without saying hello? Seem to be in a bigger rush around here.
Well, the Russians certainly are slowing down, and
You know, they can't build a damn refrigerator. How the heck they beat us into space?
You almost get the sense of the politician.
You know, that was one of the multifaceted merits of John Glenn. Not only was he as sharp as nails, but he just had this really bright personality that was very, very useful for NASA's PR machine. And of course, as you just suggested, he used that very well in running for public office in the subsequent years.
It's illegible.
Those numbers have already been confirmed by 2 engineers in this department and myself. This is more or less a dummy check.
Even if she didn't often confront, you know, racism as such in the workplace, you know, I think these scenes are important nonetheless because it's a representation of what was going on.
Yes.
And you know, in some ways, this movie, it kind of reminds me of the movie Glory to an extent because, you know, you can, you know, make kind of complaints about, you know, historical accuracy and, well, this person experienced that and that person experienced this. But ultimately, it comes down to the broader kind of holistic experience of what people are going through in a certain time period.
Use the big hammer.
Yes, sir. Come on, use a big hammer. You heard the man. Let's go.
It's interesting having to build a bigger door because trying to get the machinery in.
That's always something that surprises students because, you know, I tell them that, you know, the multi-ton computers that took up these very large wings in buildings, and yet the phone that you have in your pocket has greater computing power than what the computer in the, you know, Apollo 11 capsules had. So, you know, evolution indeed.
And how do you know about the Atlas rocket? That's not math. That data's not here, like you said. It's classified.
I guess one of the points of this movie is looking beyond the traditional or the accepted ways of thinking and doing things, and because there may be someone who can help answer the question or the issue and see it in a different light. Literally.
Except you don't have the educational requirements.
I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and physical science. It's the same as most engineers around here.
Well, we now require advanced extension courses through the University of Virginia.
If memory serves correctly, she had already completed her extension courses 3 years prior to these scenes, but it certainly, from a dramatic emphasis, makes sense to overlap the storylines and cross-connect them in that sort of way.
Pay attention to that. We're not part of that trouble. Go on.
So the juxtaposition of those protesting, and then her like, we're not part of that, but you do become part of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think this movie and the film Loving share a lot of similarity, because ultimately some of the most iconic people of the civil rights movement, I mean, they did not set out aspiring to be heroes.
Yes.
They were just individuals who wanted to go about their daily lives and have the equal opportunity to public rights, facilities, you know, and so on and so forth. And their hands are ultimately forced.
Right.
You took that book, Mama?
Son, I pay taxes. And taxes pay for everything in that library. You can't take something you already paid for.
Yeah, they come to a decision. If not for me, if I don't do it, who will?
Mm-hmm.
We interrupt this musical programming with breaking news. The Soviet news agency has announced that Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin has become the first man in space.
It's interesting to see that science and engineering was pushed to go further due to the competition between socialism, communism, and American democracy.
It's led many people to ask the question, would the space race have even occurred, or would space exploration, or NASA for that matter, have even come into existence had it not been for that competition? As the old saying goes, war, whether it be hot or cold, is often the mother of invention.
Yes.
And here to hear some of that great archival footage that we were talking about earlier, and how it can be sliced into the recreation of these various vignettes. And they filmed everything to our benefit.
Yes.
We're honored to serve our country, so we don't think about danger. We don't have time to be scared. We got a job to do.
There's some nice narrative overlap between this film and the 1983 movie The Right Stuff, which of course is about these, you know, first astronauts in the late 50s and the early 60s. And some of these scenes are created in almost like a verbatim sense, and then there's another one or two where the director gets a little bit creative. We'll talk about some of those later on.
Lord knows you don't pay colors enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch.
Well, in essence, she said that she was never compelled to act this way because she was never treated as the movie depicted. But once again, it's representational. It's not necessarily her story, but it's of the story of the generation. And man, it's a powerful scene too, even if it's almost completely fictitious from her story. What are your thoughts on this scene?
To me, again, it's more of a representation of tearing down the barriers. As I'm assuming it really did not happen that way, but it just gets across the point of that everybody's on the same team, so it's time to treat each other.
Yeah, you know, and some people were kind of critical of this scene because, you know, some people argued that it kind of gets into the white savior trope territory, you know, that it took a white man to intervene here to make things right. I think more so what the director was trying to say, that in order for the civil rights movement to be a success, it also required the assistance of empathetic white people.
Correct.
And only by understanding the condition of others and having empathy can society move forward. And so I think that's by and large what the symbolism of that fictional scene was trying to get across. What do you think?
I agree with that assessment of the scene, in that yes, black folks were taking their, standing up for their rights, but you still had whites in charge and with the power. So if something was going to happen, it was going to take, in this case, more than likely, white men to say to other white men, this must change for our benefit, for everybody's benefit. Again, probably not as dramatic as tearing down that sign, but the idea of, yes,
it's very symbolic.
Yes, everybody's together. Therefore, there is no segregated sections.
And and I think that's really what Catherine Goebel felt when she was working at NASA, is that the sense of togetherness, that sort of team spirit, was something that she often did not feel outside of NASA, because once she left that gate, she was in segregated Virginia and not on federal property.
Right.
So, yeah, I think there's all sorts of interesting ways you can analyze these scenes as such.
2, 1, 0. We have ignition, and we have liftoff.
The other benefit of archival footage is it's a lot cheaper than recreating it with CGI.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
That speech was delivered at Rice University, and it's one of the really most famous speeches of Kennedy's administration. And I think one reason why it's so famous is because it captures the zeal and the enthusiasm and the youthful vigor that was representative of so many up-and-coming people in government work and public service, including the people here working at NASA.
Yes.
Our last shot before we strap Glenn to the Atlas and pray we can bring him back down.
Yes, and I imagine he'd like us to have the math worked out beforehand.
You sense the unity with something like that happening. That would be something that all Americans, when they were able to watch it or hear it on the radio, would feel, yeah, this is what it's good to be an American.
The bus was on fire and had to go out into the mob.
The kids don't need to be watching
They
this.
need to see this.
Well, when we got off the bus in Birmingham...
Everybody needs to see this.
And going back to the point of unity, speaking how something like the space program could unify people of many, many backgrounds. A lot of people don't know that there was an African-American test pilot who was in the running to become one of these first astronauts as well. His name was Ed Dwight.
Okay.
And there were those within the Kennedy administration who wanted a black astronaut. Now you might be able to question their motives. Did they believe in it, or was it a token gesture?
Right.
But in any case, sadly he didn't make the final cut, and some speculate that it was not because he lacked the skills to do so, but it was because of the color of his skin.
It would be interesting to have his story told.
Yeah, and you know, that would be another great movie. You know, be a great unofficial sequel of sorts to this film.
And I can't change the color of my skin. So I have no choice but to be the first, which I can't do without you, sir.
That's good to know about, yeah, the legacy. What is your legacy?
And that is, as we debate these issues even today, these are really important things that our policymakers and leaders should be thinking. And I don't think they think about legacy enough. And some great symbolism in this scene too, because as she runs out of the courthouse jumping for joy, what is in the background, of course, but a monument to a Confederate soldier. And so, you know, some subtle act of defiance here, you know, that perhaps, you know, some people wouldn't even notice.
And it's interesting, I'm thinking about when she was talking to the judge, he's considered to be first generation then. And attending college and so forth, and so there's that connection there. That can be also seen as, what do we have alike?
It all goes back to that idea of empathy.
The hatch is blown, Capcom.
The Liberty Bell 7 capsule is taking on water. Unfortunately, the Liberty Bell 7 capsule is lost.
Gus Grissom was absolutely devastated that he lost his spacecraft when he returned. The hatch prematurely blew. The capsule sunk 3 feet, or 3 miles. It would have been really easy to retrieve it. Sunk 3 feet, 3 miles.
Wow.
Deeper than what the Titanic did. And a number of years ago, they were finally able to recover it, and it's been restored and it's on display at one of the space museums today. But it crushed Gus Grissom that his ship went down, you know, because he's like, I never lost a ship before, but there he did, and of course, Gus Grissom was later one of the 3 Apollo 1 astronauts killed in an accidental training mishap in 1967.
So let's get to work.
Mr. Stafford?
What, Catherine?
If I could attend the briefings, I'd be more useful to the project.
There's a lot of conversation in this movie about Catherine wanting to get into the briefings, you know, to be in the fold.
Right.
And she won over that issue through mere persistence. And it eventually came down to the matter of, you know, her asking somebody, well, is there a law saying I can't come to the meetings?
Right.
And like, well, no, but no one's done it before. And so she just started showing up, and she started going to the meetings in the same way that she just used whatever bathroom she wanted to.
Right.
You know, she thought that she had a right to be there, and that's ultimately what she did. She forged ahead.
I wonder what college students would think if they saw a blackboard that tall with the ladder, and the person moving over to write it.
I think my students would be more afraid of having to work on a typewriter.
Well, you could tell them it's a bigger cell phone. And you use more than your thumbs.
You use your index fingers instead.
17,544 miles per hour. At the time the rocket delivers the capsule into low space orbit.
Well, that's one hell of a speeding ticket.
Yeah, the actor playing John Glenn, you know, it looks to me like he's a good decade younger than what the real John Glenn was, but he nonetheless, like, elicits this kind of this lighthearted, optimistic demeanor that John Glenn very much had. So I suppose good casting on that point.
Yes.
The goal point for re-entry is 2,990 miles from where we want Colonel Glenn to land.
What I guess what I'm amazed about is that her story was told while she was still living. So folks got to know not only her, but Mary and Dorothy and their input what they added
Mm-hmm.
to our space program.
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, they've had buildings and space centers named after them. And yeah, I think it just goes to show that the power that history movies have, you know, because a written biography probably wouldn't have brought such change or such celebrity for these individuals. But if you can put a good movie about people out there, that changes everything. Which is one of the repetitive themes on our channel.
77.3333 degrees west, which is here.
I'm no mathematician. I joke with students that that's why I became a historian, is because I'm not good with numbers. But there's a certain magic to this scene as she plots all of this out, knowing that that's exactly the sort of equation work that they were doing, and just the high stakes that were involved with it. It's really wonderful stuff.
Me?
Temporarily, yes. We need the IBM for Glenn's launch.
And here, too, once again, I think it was a few years prior to this that she became one of the first supervisors as such in this capacity. But once more, from a narrative standpoint, it makes sense to have the stars align accordingly.
Excuse me?
We're gonna need a lot of manpower to program that beast. I can't do it alone. My gals are ready. They can do the work.
Good supervisor who has prepared her workforce for the changes that are coming. You know, to have the vision to see, yeah, we have a place here.
This may be my favorite scene in the movie, because it's a not so subtle tip of the hat to that iconic shot of the astronauts walking down the hangar hallway in The Right Stuff, which has been parodied and mimicked in so many movies, from Armageddon to this and, you know, everything else. And, you know, I think the bottom line in that scene is that heroes come in many forms. It's not merely the people who strap themselves to the top of the rockets, but the people who get them there, who are behind the scenes. I love that scene.
You know what your job is, Paul? Find the genius among those geniuses to pull us all up. We all get to the peak together, or we don't get there at all.
Bazinga.
Like, there's the speech. There's the speech.
Well, the curriculum is not designed for teaching a woman.
Well, I imagine it's the same as teaching a man. I don't see a colored section. Should I just take any seat?
This scene's such a good forecast of the change that's going to come about in the 1960s. Because when you think proportionately between the 1950s and the 1960s, how many more American women started going to college and getting certifications and additional degrees and extension courses during that time. It's like night and day, the change that was underway.
Euler's method.
Euler's method?
Yes.
That's ancient.
But it works. It works numerically.
And talking about theorems that I've heard the name, I just don't know what it's about.
I'm in the humanities. All of this might as well be in Greek to me.
Despite what you may think, I have nothing against y'all.
I know. I know you probably believe that.
It's an important point about latent racism. As it's not merely what you tell yourself or what you tell others. It's about how you act, how you carry yourself.
NASA has confirmed that the IBM 790 data processing system has been utilized to confirm all of the mission's launch and recovery system calculations.
I wonder if IBM paid for it. With the, I mean, their product is
placement
is definitely being promoted.
Let's get the girl to check the numbers.
The girl?
Yes, sir.
You mean Catherine?
Yes, sir. The smart one. I mean, she says they're good. I'm ready to go.
So that did happen.
Yes, it did. It did. He on timing here. You know, when did he ask
for it?
You know, to do this? It probably was several days ahead of time, but you know, in the movie she does it in like 30 seconds. You know, it's greatly condensed.
Right.
But that's okay because she gets her due credit. Wouldn't have been quite as dramatic if they put 3 days later at the bottom.
Catherine.
I don't think she was actually invited into the room, but it certainly brings about an emotionally satisfying moment of recognition here toward the end of the film.
Thank you for the information, Mrs. Mitchell.
You're quite welcome, Mrs. Vaughn.
I'm not sure if you have to point it out, but yeah, being called Dorothy to Mrs. Vaughn, just respect. Finally the same level of respect.
That's a great subtle point to make reference to.
Al, we need to get him down now. He could burn up on re-entry.
This actually did happen, and there was a concern that after Glenn orbited the Earth that he would essentially be incinerated on re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Luckily, it was just a misreading of the machinery.
NASA is confirming there is some sort of malfunction with the capsule's heat shield, and it may not stay in place.
And I don't think that was something that they were advertising on the radio.
Right.
I don't think they even told John Glenn about it because there's nothing he could do about it. With Dorothy hearing it on the car radio, it's a little bit anachronistic.
Yes.
Friendship 7, do you copy? Over.
Again.
This was a frequent nervous moment as these astronauts were returning, because there would always be a few minutes of radio blackout as they were re-entering the atmosphere, and everyone was always kind of, you know, like, are they going to come out on the other side? So, not uncommon here.
Engaging shoots. Beautiful shoot. How are we looking, Capcom?
Your go, no go is good.
The real John Glenn passed away at age 95 just 3 weeks before this movie came out. And, you know, it was kind of a bittersweet moment sitting there in the theater when I went to see this, because, you know, you would hope that he could have, you know, seen himself on screen accordingly. But he didn't quite make it, but he had a heck of a ride.
Yes.
One can visit John Glenn's house that is now a museum in Ohio, which is a very cool place to check out, see his story firsthand. And him bringing her coffee, of course, is a very symbolic moment at the end here as well. And she ended up working at NASA for, I believe, 33 years.
Wow.
So, definitely earned her stripes. And she received that medal from President Obama just a year before this movie came out. So she had one really great curtain call in her last few years of her life, living to age 101. And that's a great ending.
Yes.
All right, so that's Hidden Figures. What are your final thoughts on this film?
It was good to see it again. And yeah, there were some things I missed the first time I watched it. I think the themes we've been talking about, working together as a team, thinking outside of the box, looking at all the talent that is around us, because they can add. Inclusivity, you know. So the movie gets across a lot of good, positive stuff. As someone put it, even though there were difficulties, we're celebrating the achievements, overcoming those difficulties. So, yeah.
Well said. One of the things that I really enjoy about this film, and there's kind of a lost art to the PG-rated drama. And I think this movie fits the bill and fills that void.
Yes.
Because so many historical films, because they deal with difficult subject matter, they are often not student-friendly or family accessible. And it's a careful balancing act. How do you talk about racism in a PG-rated film?
Yeah.
How can you get across the difficulties of that in a way that is also digestible for young people? I think this movie excels at that in a very vibrant way. And I think movies like this are important as a result because they can be shown in the classroom, and it can get across all those major points that you just alluded to. So
yes.
In my mind, that's one of the great strengths of Hidden Figures.
Indeed. And I would hope, as I'm looking at this and now hearing that there are other players, that I have to admit, history for me didn't become as inclusive until I was much older. And I know part of that is just because folks didn't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, now that these stories are coming out, and hopefully they'll continue, and they can be told, for the G rating and the PG rating, so that others, you can take your family, look at it, and then talk about it, what it all means, and answer those questions about why did that exist, those things that were difficulties, why did they exist? And how to make sure it becomes better.
Amen. Well said.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yes, indeed.
All right. So, with that, we thank you for tuning in on this episode of Real History. We'll see you next time.